Hi everyone, it's YvetteLeBlowitz from spiritgirl.com and welcome to Feel Good From Within. I'm super excited to be here with you today and with our very special guest, Daryl Van Tongeren, who is the author of Humble, Free Yourself from the Traps of a Narcissistic World, The Quiet Power of an Ancient Virtue. Daryl is also a social psychologist and professor of psychology at Hope College, Michigan in the USA. He has spent the last decade researching humility and its transformative powers. Super excited that we're here with you today. Daryl, how are you?
Great. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm grateful to be here.
I'm so grateful you're here, and welcome to our global audience. I'm super grateful you're here, and we're going to find out more about how we can practice being humble in a narcissistic world. Daryl, before we dive into your book, how does it feel to see me here holding up your book in Australia?
It's pretty wild. It makes me pretty excited. You hope when you write a book that someone want to read it besides like my mom. And so it's really exciting that people across the world have access to it and are interested in it. I'm really, really grateful.
I grabbed this book at Big W and I grabbed it for one reason, the title, Humble. Can you tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
Like you mentioned, professor of psychology at Hope College. I've been there for 10 years in my 11th year. I'm married to Sarah, and Sarah is a clinical social worker, mental health therapist. We've got a cat and a dog, and we're pretty active people. We enjoy biking and running and hiking, spending as much time outdoors as we can. And then my secret hobby is I like to make hot sauce. I like to make really spicy salsa and hot sauce. That's something I enjoy doing.
In your book, you also shared how you like to run.
Yeah, so I got into running when I first got my academic job. Pretty stressful, and my wife said pretty quickly, you're going to need to manage your stress in some way. If you're just working all the time, that's not good. Running should be part of your self-care regimen. And I said, I think you're absolutely right. When I first started running, I couldn't even run a mile. I mean, I tried. It was just so hard for me. I kind of worked out my first year getting up to a 5K. And after my first year, I ran my first 5K, and then it slowly took off from there. 10K, half marathon, a couple marathons. And then probably the pinnacle was being able to do a double crossing of the Grand Canyon here in the States with one of my friends and some of his buddies. And it was just a lot of fun. Running for me it truly is self-care. It's something that helps me physically, it helps me mentally. At times it's been a very spiritual experience for me. So it's something that I'm pretty committed to making sure I schedule and work into my weekly routine.
You inspired me to want to run. When I was reading your book, I was like, right, I need to get those shoes on and run. You also shared in your book about swimming, and I think this is why I could resonate with you. I didn't learn how to swim before school. You shared about overcoming your fear of swimming.
I had failed swim lessons as a kid. My parents had tried many times unsuccessfully. But a few years ago, my wife signed up for a triathlon and thought, well, gosh, this would be a lot of fun. We could train together. I'll sign up for one too. And, kind of being a bit of an overachiever, I decided to sign up for a half Ironman. So that's a 1.2 mile swim. It's a 56-mile bike ride and a 13.1 mile run. I didn't know how to swim though. Could kind of flop around in the water. So my wife, she's so kind. She's so encouraging. And for my birthday, she said, I'm going to get you swim lessons. And so she found the best swim coach in the entire state. And so I drove about an hour away and I met this swim coach. And I said, hey, I'm taking these lessons because I don't know how to swim. And he said, well, just jump in the water and swim to the other side. I said, I think you're kind of missing the point here. Like, I don't know how to swim. And he said, come on, just jump in and go. So I get about 2 stroke, what I think is a stroke. It's kind of me just flailing in the pool at this point. He yells and he says, stop, what are you doing? Like, that's not swimming. And I was like, well, yeah, I know it's not swimming. This is why I hired you. So he was under the misperception that my wife hired him for me because I was a collegiate swimmer who needed help with his technique to transition into doing triathlons. But I literally didn't know how to swim. So it was about an hour of the most creative use of vulgarity and berating that I'd ever experienced. And at the end, he was like, I can't help you. It was a little soul crushing. I must admit, this was a birthday present for me. He kind of publicly humiliated me. I had the opportunity to say, well, I could just quit. I could just kind of give in to my shame and just kind of be someone who doesn't know how to swim and allow this to stop me from this goal that I had set. Or I could kind of humble myself and realize, look, maybe there are some other options. So I called the local rec center and I said, hey, I'd love to get swim lessons. And they said, great, how old is your child? I was like, oh, no, this is for me. I'm really sorry. I'm an adult man who doesn't know how to swim. And so got this arrangement where a local swim coach who coached a middle school swim team would come over, and I kind of had this pool all to myself. It was kind of during a lull in the day, and she taught me how to swim. It was a middle school swim coach who very patiently, very kindly took me through all the basics. And after I finished that triathlon, I texted her and I said, I did it. Because of you, I was able to finish the swim. Not fast, but I did it. And for that, I was really grateful.
When I reflect on that story, when it comes to the different swim teachers, we had one that really couldn't help you and didn't really show much empathy or compassion towards that.
That's right.
And then we had another swim coach. Yeah, I can help you with this. We can do this. But you also practice what I felt was humility when a little kid says to you, hey, this is how you do it.
Oh, yeah. So she had invited over her star pupil to jump in the pool and kind of show me the several lessons in. I still wasn't getting something. I had this aversion about putting my head under the water. I couldn't figure out how to do the breathing and side to side. He jumps in and he makes it look so effortless. And this is another opportunity where I could be really ashamed. I could say, like, I should know this. What do I have to learn from this child? He was so kind and he showed me. She was kind. And like you mentioned, there was just a lot of empathy, right? There was a lot of understanding. There was a lot of grace and compassion. And yeah, and this child kind of showed me the ropes. Then he went back into his swim practice. I jumped in and I tried to start putting those things into practice.
Love that story. Now, when we come to the book title, Humble, what is the meaning of your book title and what does humble actually mean?
When we're thinking about being humble or when we're thinking about humility, there's kind of two ways to think about it. In one way, we think about being humble or humility as knowing yourself, checking yourself, and going beyond yourself. The first part, knowing yourself, is having an accurate awareness of your strengths and your limitations, the things you're good at, the things you're not good at. Maybe I'm decent at running, but I don't know how to swim. The second part is checking yourself. So all of us tend to run a little bit selfish, a little bit aggrandizing. We enjoy taking the praise. We don't like sharing the blame. So checking ourselves is when we can rein in and hold back on those selfish motives. And then the third part is going beyond ourselves. So this is really when we consider the needs of other people as important as we consider our own. So we tend to think, I want to make sure I get my needs met first. And if someone else doesn't, well, that's their problem. But if you're being humble, if you're practicing humility, you're caring about someone else's needs just like your own. Knowing yourself, checking yourself, and going beyond yourself. The other way to kind of think about humility is to think about it as being the right size. Not too big, but also not too small. So the ditch on one side is this narcissistic conceit and arrogance, but the ditch on the other side is being too small, not really showing up, being a pushover. And humility is about being in the middle. It's a security that comes from knowing who you are, your strengths, your weaknesses, what you have to offer, and resting in that security. So for some people, they need to size down, but other people need to size up.
In Australia, where I grew up, people didn't like big noters. So I kind of took that on board, even if you were successful at something. I used to love cross-country running and come in first and things, but I wouldn't make a big deal out of it. It'd just be like a quiet achiever. But I think a lot of that came from also that cultural systemic belief that even if you win, you don't want to be a big noter and rub it into everyone else's face. Cultures are very different across the world. Have you noticed in your research that you've done extensively that different parts of the world, humility and being humble just comes natural? When I think about the US, I really reflect on how much emphasis goes on to Hollywood. It's all about stardom and fashion and glitz and glamour and this look at me, I'm on the red carpet. So I kind of didn't grow up in that environment and I was very limited to it. Have you seen the difference whilst researching? Can you pick up the difference in culture?
I'm so glad you mentioned that. Culture does play a huge role. Absolutely. So even like you're mentioning the cultural differences. So in Australia, there being a sense of you don't want to bring too much attention to yourself. You don't want the spotlight on yourself, even though you've achieved and you've earned. You should just be that quiet achiever. The US is quite different. I mean, we're in the midst of what has been a decades-long narcissism epidemic. I mean, we are just so fascinated with ourselves. We're tripping over ourselves by thinking we're so incredibly great. But the truth is we are more lonely and anxious and depressed and miserable than we've ever been before. And this hyper focus on making sure we have this overly glowing representation of ourselves and this incredibly inflated self-esteem, it's not working. We're not happy. We're not living meaningful lives if the only things we're doing are trying to achieve these unattainable and constantly shifting standards of beauty and wealth and fame and success. Because as soon as you get close to it, you realize there's another level. There's someone who's better than you. There's someone who's making more money, has a more interesting Instagram feed or Twitter following. And so as long as we keep chasing those standards, what we do is we give away autonomy from our life. And that's why I think humility can be so life-changing, is it frees you from having to seek approval from other people, finding your worth in other things outside of yourself. Once you realize that that is fool's errand, you're never going to achieve or gain the approval you so desperately need, and rather you can rest in the security of knowing that you're already enough, you're already loved, you're already worthy. Then you can take back over autonomy and start living a life that's in accordance with your values, rather than a life that's oriented towards these external standards.
For someone who started out blogging pre-Facebook, it was just written form. You wrote your thoughts and feelings and you pushed it out to the world. I have discovered when no money was involved in blogging, to be honest, no one gave a shit. There were some excellent writers and people who had ambition of becoming a writer, getting their name printed in a magazine or an article. But generally, the focus was connecting to the audience one-on-one, but there was no superficial bullshit. No one even gave a shit what the writer looked like. No one cared.
Nope.
But then I noticed a spike in narcissism when there was this really big shift in culture when someone published an article which was, if you had so many followers, say 100,000, you could get paid $1,000 per post. And then people cottoned on you could make money out of taking photos of themselves or promoting products. And then what I discovered was an illusion of a society, and the focus was going on basically individualism.
Right.
If we want to cultivate being more humble, how can we do that in our day-to-day life?
As you asked that, I think the first place we have to start is have to ask someone that we know well, who knows us well, that we trust, and whose opinion we value, to just give us some honest feedback. I mean, I've been studying this for a while, and I am so far from perfecting this. I mean, this is something that I try to get better at each day, and I still fail. There's still areas in which I have gaps. There are areas where I have my own blind spots, areas where I think I'm being humble, and I'm being a narcissistic jerk. So starting with some honest feedback is the first place. For me, it's my wife, it's some trusted friends that I have that can really let me know, how am I doing in this area?
Talking about your wife, you shared that story in your book.
Yeah.
And when you asked her, she was like, you were so self-focused on doing your run.
Right.
But you were supposed to come home early, help her pack up the car. Tell us more about this, Daryl.
Yeah, so this was the very first interview I got on humility. This person was so interested, but I'd made plans with my wife. We were going to go to the beach. We had it circled on our calendar. And I took the interview knowing I already had plans. So I'm already in the hole already, 0 for 1. The interview, I told my wife would go 15 minutes. It ends up going an hour. So I'm making her wait. She's so patient. She's made the lunches. She's packed the car. She's ready to go to the beach. The interviewer thinks, how clever would it be if a humility expert would get a rating on how humble he is since he's been studying it. So I come upstairs. My wife, she's really trying to be patient, but I've really kept her waiting a long time, longer than I thought. And then I have the nerve to say, by the way, I know I've kept you waiting, but can I just meet you at the beach? It's 7 miles away, and I have a 7-mile run planned for today because I'm training for this marathon. You can drive down there. You can lug the stuff out to the water, and I'm going to run down there. And she looks at me, appropriately so, like I had said something horribly offensive, because I had. I was so self-focused at that time. I'm coming off this great feeling of being this expert in humility. and getting this great interview. And the only thing I can think about is making sure my needs are met, making sure I can get my run in, not even thinking that I've made her wait, not even thanking her for packing the car, for making the lunches, for waiting. And then I say, by the way, how humble am I on a scale of 1 to 10? And she gives me a 4. In retrospect, that was generous. I don't even deserve that 4. That was one of those moments where I had a blind spot. I was acting selfishly, and I didn't consider her needs.
That story you shared then, thank you, and it was in the book. What I did like, though, was that you were able to take the feedback on and then self-reflect and then make changes.
Well, thanks. And that was my hope. That's kind of the second part of what to do to kind of cultivate greater humility is when you get the feedback, try not to be defensive. And in the moment, I wanted to get defensive. I wanted to say, well, wait a minute. How about all these amazing, great things that I do? All these other ways that I'm humble. You're not going to convince someone you're humble by bragging about your own humility. That's too ironic, right? So after my kind of initial defensiveness, I realized she's absolutely right. And it gave me pause to start thinking about what are some other areas where I'm not even seeing it. And so for some of us, these are going to be these implicit things that are operating underneath the surface. It could also be cultural aspects. Are you living in a culture where sexism is a little bit more predominant? Am I kind of taking advantage of the fact that I'm living in a little bit of more of a sexist culture and I'm not listening or I'm not considering the needs of my wife or of other people? I really tried. It was kind of a wake-up call for me to start a more deliberate practice of how do I need to be thinking about this differently? How do I need to be listening better? How can I listen better? How can I take the perspective of somebody else? And that's kind of that third key is really trying to cultivate empathy. So when we think about empathy, we think about it's taking someone else's perspective, this cognitive or this mental part of it. And then it's also, there's this emotional part of it. How can I imagine what someone else is feeling? How can I attune to their feelings? I think trying to cultivate empathy is absolutely critical for humility. You have to get outside of your own mind. You have to get outside of your own perspective. And you have to imagine, how would I have felt if I was waiting for an hour and I was excited to go and I had done all this work and then she wants me to do even more work and kind of push me off even further? I'd be upset. And so I think trying to build that empathy is kind of that third key.
I love how you just shared that. And also in your book, because you didn't have to, you could have just this big, I study humble, I'm an expert. But I do love how you were sharing your own examples. And there's a friend that you reference in this book where you look towards him as an example of what being a humble person is. Can you share more about that?
One of the people that I think about who models humility is my friend Kevin. Kevin, to me, is someone who's extremely accomplished in many ways. So he's very smart, went to good schools, is just a very bright person. He's a standing musician. He's a very kind, thoughtful person. But I think what to me marks humility so much in Kevin's life are two things. The first is he's genuinely curious and he wants to listen. So if he comes across a viewpoint that's not his or it's dissimilar, he has a genuine curiosity. He asks to learn more and he genuinely wants to know someone else's experience. And then the second thing is he's genuinely open to change. And if he's encountered something, there's sufficient evidence, he'll change his mind. Or if he's met somebody and their experience is enlightening for him, he'll change. He'll change his mind. He'll change his behavior. He'll try new things. His openness and his willingness to listen, to me, is incredibly motivating and inspiring.
Wow, that is incredible. Because you see in this current world, whether it's social media or even in day-to-day life, if someone has a different viewpoint, people want to attack that person. Obviously, if we want to become more humble or practice humility, we can do this in every facet, can't we? Whether it's on social media or in real life. You mentioned curiosity, listening, being open to hearing other people's stories, viewpoints.
Yeah, absolutely. I've never met someone who said, you know what? I was on Instagram the other day and someone I've never met made an argument and now I've changed my mind. That's just not how it works. Most of us on social media, we try to defend our opinion. If someone we don't like or we don't know disagrees with us, we call them a troll or we block them or we unfriend them. No one really changes their minds in these ways. That's not how that works. Usually the way that lasting change happens is you have a relationship with someone. You meet someone who might be different than you or holds a different viewpoint and you realize, I like this person. They're not that bad. They're kind of just like me. I can kind of see their perspective. I can see their point. most change comes through relationships. It doesn't come by us arguing. Very rarely does someone argue someone to change their mind. And if they do, they kind of just say that they've changed their mind to stop the conversation and then they leave.
So this humility and being humble can be so beneficial, can't it, for our mental health and well-being within our community and globally?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a number of really considerable benefits of humility. So the first is it does improve our well-being. If we're humble, we're going to have a more accurate view of the world. We're going to have a more accurate view of ourselves. And then we can start making decisions based on that accurate information. We can realize, where are my strengths? Where are my weaknesses? Where do I need to grow? And I don't have to be good at everything. I'm not. There's actually like a very narrow range of things I'm decent at. And then there's a couple of things I think I'm pretty good at. I've built up some expertise, and I'm sure the same for you. You've built up expertise, but there's probably some areas you need to grow. We can get support for the areas we need to grow, or we can have a community to help us, or we can realize that's not for me. The second thing, and probably the biggest area, is humility really transforms our relationships. So over and over, time and again, research has found we want to be friends with people who are humble. We want to be romantic partners with people who are humble. When we're in relationships with people who are humble, we're more likely to be committed to them, to be satisfied with our relationship, to forgive them when they do hurt us. The relationship benefits are even physiological. We have better stress reactions when both we and our partner are humble and we're going through a big life transition. And people will say, well, what about, don't we want to date the narcissistic life of the party? At the beginning, that feels so fun. And we kind of get attracted to the flashy person who dumps the punch bowl on someone else's head at the party. But the routine gets old really quick. And when you go home with that person, over time, you're going to be the one they're, quote unquote, proverbially dumping the punch bowl on, because they have to maintain their own ego and perceive superiority. So we really do want to be more with humble people. And then finally, the last area where we see humility is it really helps us anchor achievement and ambition. We can set high goals, and we can even be somewhat highly demanding as leaders, as long as we counterbalance that with humility. So if we're just hard-driving leaders, people won't respect us, they won't listen to us, it feels exploitive. But if we can pair that with humility, we really can achieve things far greater than if we try to just push our way through with narcissistic conceit.
And for someone who's been researching this topic, what really got you into the topic? Humility, being humble.
Lucky to be part of a group back in my graduate program who was studying different virtues, different aspects of positive psychology. And I had spent several years studying forgiveness. And one of the things that had kept coming up was kind of, who are we most likely to forgive? And it's really those people who own their mistakes. They take responsibility for being offensive or for hurting someone else's feelings. They're repentant and willing to change. And so the group started talking, and we thought, well, this sounds a lot like someone who's humble. This sounds like someone who is open to feedback. They can own their limitations. They're self-aware. And so there was a group of us, part of a group, but it's certainly not just myself, who's been studying this for about a decade. And the more I started doing research in this area, the more I realized this is exactly what our world needs right now. Our communities are divided on politics and religion and issues of culture and identity. Without humility, we're not going to be able to have the type of productive conversations we need as a society to heal some of these wounds and bridge some of these divides. And also, as a society, any type of advancement, any type of breakthrough technologically or in medicine or in science happens with intellectual humility, with admitting we don't know something, but we want to learn. And so to me, humility just seems so vital in our families, in our communities, in our society as a whole.
And you shared a really interesting story in your book, which was you went to a dinner party. You felt that the people you were catching up with, they're really intelligent. What I took away from the dinner party, though, is you should be yourself. If you don't know something, just say you don't know it. And you should never feel that you have to try and make out that you kind of know when you don't know, just to sort of fit in. Tell us more about the dinner party and what you learned when it comes to humility and being humble.
These are our dear friends. And I think we've become dear friends because we've been able to be more honest. They're just bright people, cultured, well-traveled, so many experiences. They eat good food. They drink the best wine. They're really kind of who everybody kind of wants to be. And so we would be having these conversations, and they've asked if I had been to these interesting places or read these incredibly interesting books or seen these very, specific cultured shows. And in the beginning, I didn't want to look foolish. So I said, oh, yes, I've done that. And I had no idea. But then what I realized was just felt so disingenuous. So I said, okay, next time we get together, I'm just going to tell the truth. And so they said, have you seen this show? And I said, I haven't. They said, oh, you really should. Or they said, have you ever read this book? And I said, no. They walked in the other room. They brought the book out. They handed it to me. Well, then I went home and I read the book and gosh, they were right. It was a great book. And so what I realized was by me not being myself, by me pretending to be something that I wasn't, I was actually losing out on a whole bunch of opportunities for growth, to connect with my friends in an authentic way. And I've been opened up to all these new experiences, these great books that I've read, these great shows that I've seen, these great recipes I've tried, or places to go travel because I said I haven't, but I'm open and I'm willing to listen.
Such a good message. I haven't, but I'm open to listen.
Right.
What I got from that story is by us really speaking our truth, even though we might feel embarrassed, by doing that, though, it opens you up to growth, personal development, plus opportunities, because then your friends are like telling you all these great places to eat and books, and your whole world opened up. Whereas if you would continue the practice of, yeah, I know that. And you can feel it within, can't you? The shift, the difference.
I felt more comfortable. I felt like I could be like myself. And to be honest, at least this is the case for me. Most of the people I want to be around, when I give them that response, they meet that graciously. They meet that compassionately. And in fact, they just want to share. I mean, again, this is just me. If someone's going to judge me for not having had that experience and look down on me, I'm not sure that we were going to really hit it off as friends anyway, because I can't really do everything someone else has wanted to do in life. I felt like I could be more authentically myself, and they met me with compassion. And I think what I've seen for them is that they've also reciprocated. So there have been things and experiences that I've had, and they've said, I've never heard of that. Tell me more about that.
I love that. Friendships where you're sharing experiences and things reflecting on these current times. We're trying to take photos of everything, even when people are being kind now, giving flowers to someone because they're doing it for TikTok. Do you believe we can still practice humility without having to take photos of ourselves whilst doing it and videos to capture it for our social media?
Yeah, and I certainly hope that we would. I hope that we would be compelled to do things because we think that they're good or they're true or they're beautiful, whether or not we capture them, whether or not we get the affirmation and approval of other people. I would hope that we, as a human species, are so motivated to do those things out of compassion, out of care, out of love for our fellow human, not need to capture that. Content needs to be generated. Can it be oriented towards highlighting other people and not just ourselves? Can it be showcasing other folks who might not have the platform that some people have? Can it be highlighting the goodness of others? Can it be highlighting more of a virtuous world that goes beyond ourselves and tries to create meaning rather than just self-fulfillment?
I love that. What made you decide to write your book?
This is a little bit of behind the scenes. I'd written a paper in an academic journal, which very few people will read, other academics. And it surprisingly got picked up by the New York Times. And so the New York Times did a piece on it. I was flattered and I was interviewed for this piece. And then a couple days later, I got an email from a couple of book agents in New York who said, we love this piece on humility. This is so countercultural. Are you interested in writing a book on humility? And I'll tell you, my first thought was, oh, I'm sure there's someone else better suited to write the book than me. And then I realized, wait a minute, I think I'm selling myself a little short here. And so they said, no, let's take an honest go at it. And some agents reached out to me. They said, we think we have an idea here. And so we wrote the book. It's a very different process than writing my normal writing for scholarly journal articles, but so much fun. My agents were terrific. The publishers were terrific. The editor was outstanding. I mean, they picked an outstanding cover. I mean, something like I couldn't have even come up with the dove flying in a different direction than the peacocks. For me, it was really just a joy to be able to work through this and try to share some of what we've learned in the scientific community with a broader group. I've been very grateful to be able to be a part of it.
The cover is so beautiful. Everyone go to the Spirit Girl YouTube channel. I'm holding it up. It is absolutely gorgeous. What drew me to the book was actually humble, but free yourself from the traps of a narcissistic world. Because if we can cultivate being humble, we're not trapped in this world where we are under pressure to always put ourselves out there, focus only on ourselves. And we can create a better relationships within our family and friends and community and feel more fulfilled. In your research, Have you found that being humble or practicing humility, empathy, all of this can make us feel more fulfilled?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So when people practice virtues like this, when they go beyond themselves, when they're thinking about other people, they report that life is more meaningful. In my mind, a meaningful life is so important. A lot of people go for momentary happiness. What's going to make me happy right now? But happiness is fleeting, happiness changes, and we get so accustomed to happiness that we fall off of this, what's called this hedonic treadmill. We always need more and more and more in order to be happy. Meaning is different though. When we pursue the life of going beyond ourselves, of empathy, of humility, of forgiveness, that makes life meaningful, or it makes our relationships richer. And it really does help us individually and more as a community flourish.
And then this can help with loneliness, depression, anxiety, like the mental health aspect of it. Because I've been down that path of just, you got to be the entertainer, the blogger, take photos of yourself. And it didn't really lead to sincere happiness. And then through switching my mantra of it's not about me, but we, has brought great fulfillment. And then trying to learn from others and trying to help others has been more fulfilling than taking photo after photo after photo. This can really help our communities right now when we're going through a global mental health crisis, which has really been triggered from a number of things. I mean, I just felt that this was a key component to building more resilient communities, more connected, and helping with loneliness and depression and anxiety.
Absolutely. And that's the hope, right? Because when it's all about ourselves, we turn inward. And when you turn inward for too long, you get isolated, you start feeling anxious, miss out on that need we have for other people. But I love what you said, going from me to we, shifting and going beyond yourself. That's the type of community building. That's what we need in order to have, like you said, a fulfilled life, a flourishing life, one that's richer and more than just about momentary happiness.
Love that. Daryl, you are super busy. You've got your book out, which is so exciting. And everybody, I recommend grabbing a copy of Humble. How do you take care of yourself? So what are some of your own self-care rituals?
Talk about one of them. So running for me is one of them, or some type of exercise, whether that's running or biking or being active. Usually running or biking are one of those. A second is my wife and I try to have dinner every night together. We cook, each have a glass of wine, try to connect. And so for me, like you said, that social connection is so important for me, making sure that I'm more than just the work that I'm doing and having a more balanced life. And then my wife and I just rescued a little puppy. And so this little puppy is 9 months old and he keeps us very busy, taking the dog on walks and really being in nature. I think being in nature is one of the things for me that provides the most self-care. I love feeling small compared to nature. I love feeling that nature has been here before I got here and nature will be here after I'm gone. And for me, that's very reassuring and grounding.
And what do you think if we asked your wife what you would rate in being humble today? Do you think it's better than a 4?
I'm hoping so. I think she'd get me a little higher than a 4. She joked about that. She loves that that's in the book because she said that's always going to keep you grounded. I think she might give me a little higher than that. I'm hopeful today.
Oh, that is so good. And I think that's a good exercise for all of us. So finding someone we respect or love or believe in and asking them 1 to 10.
1 to 10.
What would you rate me on when it comes to being humble? There was a key point in your book when we talk about humility. Some people get confused or think it means humiliation.
Yes, that's right. A number of people think that if we're talking about humility, we're talking about being ashamed, about being humiliated. If I did a really poor job at work and my boss criticized me, well, then I'm humble. Well, you're probably feeling ashamed, embarrassed, or humiliated. Also, sometimes when people hear the word humility, they get cautious because sometimes humility has been used in the past to tell people to be quiet or to stay in their place, and it's been a little abused as a tool of oppression. But neither of those things are authentic humility, right? Humility is a security. It's an awareness of yourself. It's going beyond yourself. It's something that really motivates us to have strong, healthy relationships with other people.
I'm just so grateful your book is out because it's a really timely book, really needed. And I just feel that this whole topic, humble, and how we can free ourselves from the traps of a narcissistic world is really going to help not only this generation, but many, many, many more to come, because this is The Quiet Power of an Ancient Virtue. What is your hope for your newfound book readers?
My hope is that reading it, they'll begin to do the hard work of trying to examine their own lives, do the hard work of examining the degree to which they're humble or not so humble, and then do the courageous step of trying to start making some of those changes to become just a little bit more humble. It's a practice. It's something we have to get a little bit better at each day. I hope that I'm better at it in a week, a month, a year than I am now. And so that this will spark in them a motivation to cultivate this in their own lives. And then I would love for this to be a broader conversation that we as different societies, different communities can come together and say, what would it look like for us to really prioritize humility, and how would that transform our lives and our neighborhoods?
I love that. And I do think we should start teaching this at school because when entertainment and media and all of that is so focused on me, I think we need to focus on we. And this would be a good subject, Daryl, at every school to learn humble. So how can we stay in touch with you, Daryl, after this podcast show?
I do have an Instagram at Daryl Van Tongeren or Twitter at Dr. Van Tongeren. Check out the book, like you mentioned. Would love to hear from you all about what you think.
Well, thank you again, Daryl Van Tongeren. It's been an absolute pleasure. I loved your book. It was a great read, lots of laugh, lots of insights, and I learned so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again. I'm super grateful.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Very grateful to be here.
Thank you. Thanks for listening in to Feel Good From Within with YvetteLeBlowitz, Spirit Girl podcast. I hope you found this conversation of interest and benefit to you. In support, I would love for you to subscribe to Feel Good From Within with YvetteLeBlowitz, Spirit Girl on any podcast app you listen to the show through, or on YouTube too. To also leave a 5-star rating and a review of what you think too. Share this show with your family, friends, and community. Be sure to subscribe to my mailing list at spiritgirl.com, YvetteLeBlowitz.com, or feelgoodfromwithin.com. You can follow Spirit Girl YvetteLeBlowitz on any social media app, and together, let's feel good from within.